In the last video we looked at proteins, and we said that proteins, the example of a protein, would be an enzyme. Now we're going to look at specifically some more information about enzymes, as they are an incredibly important piece to living things. All living things have enzymes. They would not be able to live without them. So an enzyme is just any protein that's going to speed up reactions, hence it's a catalyst. Sometimes you'll hear an enzyme called a protein catalyst. And they do that by lowering the activation energy. Now activation energy is how much energy you need to get a reaction started. For instance, when you're cooking, how much heat do you need to get the pot boiling? What do you need to do to get things going? There's energy involved in order to cook your food. And if we take a look at how much energy is required, we're looking at this right here. So this is if we did not have the enzyme or the catalyst present, your body would have to supply whatever that amount of energy is to kind of get over this hurdle. It takes some energy involved to put the items together, break the bonds apart, whatever it's doing. When it reaches that amount of energy, then it just goes. It just happens. It's like all downhill from there. Well, your body doesn't want to put forth that much energy, so with an enzyme, notice the amount of energy that you need is like a third of what it was before. So again, you still have to add some energy, but it's not nearly as much. And once you add that energy, the reaction takes right off, and we can get our product that we're looking for. So enzymes lower the activation energy. This speeds the reaction up because it can happen faster with less energy being added. Another word that you're going to hear frequently when we hear the word enzyme is the word substrate, because this is the chemical that the enzyme is going to be bonding with or acting upon. And the enzyme is going to turn the substrate into some type of a product. So in this case, here's your substrate. The substrate will come and bond to the enzyme like you see here. And in this case, the enzyme's job was to split this single item into two smaller ones, and so that's the job of that enzyme. But in this picture, it's the opposite. Again, the substrate comes in and fits to the enzyme, and this causes the substrate to be bonded together, so our product in this case is making something bigger. When we name enzymes, we need to know what substrate are they bonding to, what substrate are they reacting with, because that's how the enzyme is going to get named. For instance, this is lactose. This would be the type of sugar that you find people who are lactose intolerant, for example. You can find that in milk and dairy products. And lactase is the name of the enzyme that lactose bonds to. So you can see that their names are really similar. Lactose is the name of the substrate. Lactase is the name of the enzyme. And in this case, it takes lactose and it fits inside the enzyme here, and it causes lactose to get separated into one glucose monosaccharide and one galactose monosaccharide. So it's breaking a disaccharide up into two monosaccharides. Lactase does not work with anything else. Sucrose, for example, comes along. Shape does not fit. It will not fit there. And so lactase, the enzyme, cannot do anything else except for break down lactose. That is its one and only job that it can do. It can get very confusing with the OS and the ACE, but remember, OSE endings are normally what we hear with a lot of our carbohydrates. The ASE ending is what you're going to see with your enzymes. So we have lactase, you have sucrase is what breaks sucrose apart. And we have that example here. If the substrate is sucrose, then the enzyme name is going to be sucrase. So they're going to have kind of the same root word, and you're just going to be changing the ending to ASE. Now let's take a look at sucrase. If we had sucrase, which is an enzyme, and it's going to take sucrose and water, what's it going to break it down into? First of all, the enzyme it doesn't get used up in the process, but sucrose does get divided into two products. So if this is my sucrose molecule, and I take my enzymes, this is my enzyme, this pair of like scissors here, what it does is it's going to break the bond holding these two together so that fructose can be by itself and glucose can be by itself. The enzyme doesn't get used up. You can use that same pair of scissors again for the next sucrose molecule, and that same pair of scissors again for the next sucrose molecule. So you don't use the enzyme up, they are reusable. But the enzyme can only recognize one specific substrate, like I mentioned in the previous slide. Another important word with enzymes is the word active site. I've mentioned that the substrate bonds or fits into the enzyme. Well, the point where that happens, when this substrate comes down and kind of makes this new shape here, this point where the substrate bonds is called the active site. So the active site is nothing more than the spot or area where the enzyme and substrate connect or touch. And it is kind of like a lock and key. You have a lock for your home door or maybe a car door, and you don't want every single key to work in your lock. You don't want your neighbors to be able to come over to your house or some stranger. So you want a lock that's specific for that key. You want to think of the lock as your enzyme, and the substrate is the key. So the key fits into the lock, and it either causes the reaction to happen. If it's the wrong key, then the reaction doesn't happen. And we saw this picture before too. Again, it's very shape specific. The right key or the right substrate has to be added or it doesn't work. Lastly, we're going to look at denaturation again. And again, from proteins, we know that temperature, pH, salt concentrations, these all can cause the protein to change its shape. And if it changes the shape, in this case we're looking at enzymes, then it causes it to not work properly. It might work a little bit, but it's not going to work as effectively as it should. We have what we call optimal pH, and when you hear the word optimal, you want to be thinking that it's working at its absolute best. Anything too high of a pH or too low of a pH could cause the enzyme to change shape and be denatured. So you're going to see some bell curves, and because it looks like a bell. And what this does is this shows you the highest point, and whatever pH this is, if you look at the highest point on the curve, that would be your optimal pH. So at this point, your enzyme is working at its absolute best. It's getting, right here, the activity is on this side, so the activity is at its highest. If the pH gets too low or too high, then the activity is only way down here. So it's a little active, but it's not working very good. And the same is true for temperature. The optimal temperature would be the temperature where the enzyme is working at its best. And you do that by finding the highest tip or point on your graph and going straight down. You might even use a ruler or something to help you make sure you go straight down and you find out where does that cross on my temperature scale. In this case, maybe about 32 degrees Celsius would be my absolute best temperature. If I get up into even close to 40, my activity now is way down here. It could work at 20 degrees, but again, it's not going to be as good as if I were close to that 32 degree mark. So optimal is just best. What is the best pH, or what is the best temperature for this enzyme to be able to work?